Hello, everyone, to this Tech Excellence session. My name is Ollie, and as you know, our vision is to raise the bar of technical excellence across the world. Our organizers, well, we have Valentina here, and there's also Daniel and Alina, and of course, me. We already had great speakers this year, and we will continue to have even better speakers, hopefully, also in the future. So you can follow us on all the social media like Meetup, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course also GitHub and Discord. Our sponsor is Optivem and partners is QE Unit. So today we are joined by Paige Watson. I'm very happy to have you here. Paige is technical coach at Industrial Logic. Everybody should know Industrial Logic, who does a little bit of quality code. He has more than 25 years of industry experience and, among others, teaches teams how to create well-crafted software and processes for maturing into high-performing teams. So, Paige, I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm really looking forward to your session. Before I hand over, I want to remind the audience that you are very much encouraged to write down any comment you have in the comment section down below, and we will take it up after Paige's session to discuss it together with him. But now, Paige, I hand over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm pretty excited to be here. I want to start out with sort of a little background game that I play, just so we all get familiar. I like to play 3 truths and a lie. And the basic structure here is that, 3 of these are truths and 1 of them is a lie, right? And when I was young, I had an Atari 400 and then an 800, but I had the basic ROM and I had the basic magazine, and I had a 5,000 line file that was in the magazine that I copied. Took me weeks, I think, to copy it into my ROM, and it was going to be a picture of Farrah Fawcett, who as a kid was at the time I was kind of enamored with, and then it didn't compile, it didn't work, and I almost decided to give up programming forever. In 2000, I heard about XP development and asked a coworker to try pairing with me, and he looked at me and he laughed and walked away. And, it never happened. It didn't catch on for me until much later. I left a lucrative career in the adult entertainment industry to teach the world to build better software. I'm one of only 2 people in the world to attain the extremely hard to get certification of certified fast instructor. And I very much teach and talk about fast agile now. And then when I was younger, I saw Queen play at Live Aid. One of these is the lie, and I'm happy to talk about that later when we get to know each other a little more. When I teach, when I talk about, especially when we program together or when we're learning something together, I like to make sure that we're clear. And this is, I think, really important to everything we do as a group or as a team, right? And that the clear is one of our sort of sets of rules around being open to learning and open to learning with others, right? And that's just curious, caring, and open-minded, listening to one another, encouraging everyone to contribute, avoid dominating or interrupting, and then repeat and review other people's points. Those are really important. And I think it's something to always try and strive for when you're working as a group, because working as a group can be, it can take a little bit of practice. As much as we think collaboration and working as a group is easy, when we get into doing it, especially as developers, as software engineers, we have these sort of inherent biases that can make it a little harder. So really, really try and be open and available to learning and listening to other people and understanding that, well, you know a lot, other people know a lot also, and you can connect that together and both grow or all grow together. So Woody Zuhl describes what he refers to as mob programming as all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time in the same space and at the same computer. And this is really what we're going to talk about here. Why is this important? Why is this, I want to say, revolutionary in the sense of working in the software industry? And I'm going to touch a lot on that as we go through this and what we get out of it, what it brings to our code and what it brings to our team. So originally, this is a workshop. I have modified it a little bit for the talk today. I'm going to talk a little bit about concepts, the history, kind of why we came up with mobbing or whole team programming or ensemble work or software teaming. You'll hear a bunch of different names for it. I'll talk a little about how to get started as a group. We'll go over the roles, the communication framework, because that's a really important one, some exercises. I'll do a little bit of coding and sort of try and give you a sense of what that's like. Number 3, the Let's Collaborate is a holdover from the workshop. I don't think we're going to necessarily collaborate as a group as much today, but I'll give you a sense of what that feels like and how to go about that. And then at the end, we usually have a retrospective, feedback, Q&A, things like that. I'm more than open to answer questions, sort of give any direction that I can. I think that collaborative programming, especially in a group, is very important and is very powerful and makes great software. It's the best way that I know how to make software from a team perspective right now. Maybe there's a better way. Haven't found that yet. So some of the concepts around collaborative work. I'll put this up here. Again, this is a book by Woody Zuhl and Kevin Meadows. This is the second edition. The first one, I think, was called Mob Programming. They've re-released it, updated some stuff, and they're calling it software teaming now. And I would highly recommend reading this book if you haven't. It's very informative, and it kind of comes from the base, the original sort of I don't want to say founder, but the person who discovered this and said, this is a thing, we should write this down. So excellent book, totally worth the read. Also a note, all of these QR codes will go to web pages. At the end, I have a resources slide where they'll all be available also. So you don't have to rush to find that right now. So what's in a name, right? You'll hear mobbing. Mobbing was kind of the original name that sort of caught on. Originally, Woody Zuhl was saying that he wanted to call this software teaming, and tried, but it didn't catch on as much as mob programming or mobbing did. Later, there was a change where we started talking about it as ensemble work, because it really is an ensemble of different people, not just developers, but developers, testers, business analysts, PMs, everybody that needs to be there at the time the great software is made. Ensemble also there was a sort of a negative connotation around the word mob. A lot of people still use it. It kind of is here or there. Either way, doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what the name is. It matters what the idea is. I like to talk about whole team programming because we use the whole team. If you're on a larger team, maybe you have multiple groups, but it really is about working together as a team. So let's talk a little about collaboration, right? Do you work as a team now? I'm going to ask that because this is something really to think about, to understand. We often think that we're a team because we're a group of people working on the same feature set, or we're a group of people working on the same application in the same area. But are we really working as a team, or are we working as a group of independent contributors? This is, I think, one of the biggest sort of things that I run into when I ask like companies, teams, are you guys really a team, right? And oftentimes we think, yeah, we're all working on the same feature. We're all working towards this. We collaborate because we meet once every day and we talk about what we're doing. And well, that's helpful communication. I wouldn't necessarily call it collaborating in terms of writing code and growing your app. When you really collaborate, when you really work as a group, you're actually all putting your best work into the code at the time the code is being written. And that means that you produce a higher quality code more rapidly. As a newer person to a team, I might not have a lot of domain knowledge, but I might have some knowledge about writing good quality, object-oriented code that maybe the team doesn't, or writing tests that maybe the team doesn't, right? And so when we're working together, when we're collaborating, I actually get to spread that knowledge to others, and I get to learn from others, right? Collaboration is probably the easiest way to onboard someone. Have a group of people sit with that new person and go through all the paperwork and go through setting up the computer. Collaboration is the way to spread quality practices. If you have if you have a code, oh boy, I just forgot the word. If you have a set of rules around what your code is supposed to look like, and 4 spaces or tabs or whatever, as opposed to giving someone a document and having them read it and go through it. And, if you're working as a collaborative group, that knowledge is going to start to spread quicker. You get that sort of rising tide effect. Everybody learns together. And if I'm collaborating with a couple people over here and we do some stuff, and then I go and collaborate with another group over there, there are times when I say, we were working on this thing the other day that was sort of the same. Maybe we could try this, right? And it sort of organically spreads knowledge across groups, much more so than writing documents or a wiki or whatnot. Excuse me. When we collaborate, we grow team ownership and code responsibility. And what does this mean? It means that this code that is written is no longer mine. It's not my code. It's our code. We all wrote it together. We all got to the point that we believed it was the most acceptable, the best, the appropriate code for the problem. We all committed it. We all, we wrote it together. We have an ownership over it. And this is really important because really what happens when you grow team ownership of code and that code responsibility is that there's no longer an us a me versus you type of effect. There's an us, right? You start to hear teams talk about we as a team. You start to hear, like, I didn't write a bug that got into production. We wrote a bug, unfortunately, and we let it get into production, right? Becomes a responsibility. We as a team need to clean this up. We need to make this better. We need to refactor this. Not I need to, not I want to, not you should. We, right? It really has an effect of bringing the team together, and really sort of sets a pride in their work and sets a responsibility for doing the right thing. And it's really quite actually a fabulous way to work. Very much an effect of collaborating, of being together and working on the same thing. I talked a little bit about the rising tide effect, in that we organically spread that knowledge. And sort of as an aside to that, when we work collaboratively versus working independently, I get to learn a little about domain aspects that I'm not familiar with. If I'm a UI developer and I have sort of a specialization in the UI, I know it. I've done it more and more over the years, and probably more than other people on the team. But I don't necessarily understand the back end or the API or data. And I'm working in a collaborative group, and we're working in back-end API stuff or data stuff. I'm learning about that, and I'm able to contribute and say, oh, I know that we're getting this data and we're passing it to the API, but the UI is going to consume it in this way. So let's change the output, or let's just sort of work around that. But I also start to understand the back end and the data a little better. So it makes the whole application better. It makes everything we touch better, because now, as I'm explaining how the outputs of this API affect the front end, the people who tend to be a little stronger in back end and database and that sort of thing, and not UI, get to understand how that works as well. And then when somebody goes vacation, they get sick, they're out of the office, they can't be there that day, we can still continue to work, because while I might not have the greatest knowledge of a certain area of our work, I know that stuff that we've been working on, I've learned a little more about the back end, and I can sort of pick up the smaller parts of that, and we can continue to move forward, without having to have a SME or a back-end developer or whatnot. So it really starts to spread that knowledge around, and that's really an important aspect of this. You find more effective solutions because I think when you're working collaboratively, you start to have conversations that you wouldn't have necessarily working independently. As a developer, I've been doing this for 30 some years, and I know what works. Oh, I've seen this before. I'm just going to write this code because I know it works. That's fine. It might not be the best code for the best situation. When I work with another group, they start to question that, and question it in a way, like in a positive way. Hey, that works, but maybe we could try this because I've also done this other way, and maybe that's better for this situation. Maybe it uses less memory. Can we try it this way? And so you start to have this conversation about what's the right way. There's the way I know, there's the way you know. What's the right way for this situation? And we all agree on it, going back to that ownership and responsibility. We all start to agree, we all understand, and we find the more effective solution. And then finally, when we collaborate, we're just happier. I really enjoy working in a group. That might be a blanket statement. I've known some people who would much rather be alone. And I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I'm just saying that in most cases, in most situations, it's more comfortable to come in and work as a group. And especially when you start to really become a solid team, you start to you start to laugh, you start to have a good time. I very much enjoyed coming into work and being able to sort of hang out with friends, really, and do good work and be proud of my work and theirs. And let's see where we go from here. I'm going to throw out a really good blog post from Tim Ottinger talking about scatter gather versus collaboration. Scatter gather being the giving a story to one person and they go work on it, and giving another story to another person and they go work on it. And that scattering of work and having to gather it all back together and put it all together. So I'm going to recommend that you take a look at that when you have some time. So let's talk about practice and I'm going to talk about roles first. We have two basic roles, two really, really basic roles, the driver and navigator. And then I'll talk about steward and sheriff, which aren't necessarily required mobbing roles, but are very important and sort of effective in a mob as you start to become accustomed and experienced to it. The two basic roles are a driver and a navigator. The driver, the person at the keyboard, their job is basically to be a smart input to get the code in the computer. And the navigator is the person that's actually solving the problem. And when you think about this, you can think of, gosh, it's kind of antiquated, but I often talk about the CEO and the administrative assistant, and how one person, the CEO, that person is the navigator. They say, let's write a letter, please, and the administrative assistant will start to take notes, and the one person will start talking about solving the problem, the navigator, and they'll say, dear Mrs. Johnson, thank you very much for your letter. We understand this problem is causing you issues, and we'd like to offer blah, 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 solving the problem. The driver in this case, the person taking notes, is not thinking about solving the problem. They're thinking about getting the code, or in this case, the notes, into the form that it needs to be. So they're frantically taking notes. I don't know if anybody uses shorthand anymore. They used to use a thing called shorthand, which is a way of taking notes without, you drop vowels from certain words. You use different characters. And so their job is to think about form. Their job is to think about grammar, spelling. The same thing when we're writing code. The driver's job is to think about typing and syntax and where the code goes, and cut and paste and all those sort of things that we do manually to get the code into the computer. Whereas the navigator's job is to solve the problem. The navigator will say something like, okay, I want to go into the whatever the API class, and the repository, and we're gonna call the API, and I want to pass the two variables from this input, and then I want to return a new foo object, please. Right? They're not writing code. They're not even really talking in code. They're giving an explanation of how to solve the problem. The driver, on the other hand, is switching to the repository class file, and they're going down and they're adding a new function or method, and they're adding the 2 inputs, and then they're making the call to the back end, all these sort of things. They're madly typing away to get this solution into the computer. And this is really important because oftentimes we, all the time, we don't really, gosh, I lost my train of thought. We don't do more than one thing at a time as human beings. Some people are really good at context switching and can, but most people can't. And so as a developer, if I'm thinking about the solution and I'm thinking about typing the syntax and, Control C, Control V, and, all that sort of thing, I have to do these context switches rapidly in my head. And that causes me to have to sort of remove parts of the data, the memory, to replace it with other parts in the temporary memory, and maybe not always solve the problem in the best way. So if we can have one person or multiple people thinking about solving the problem, and then one person thinking about writing this in code format into the computer, it's much easier and much more effective. And so I'm gonna finish on, let me talk about steward and sheriff, and then I'm gonna actually get to some of the comments, because I think there are some that are fairly close to what we're talking about and would fit really well here. So when we work in a group, and this group, the groups that I've worked in have usually been between 4 and 6 people. 6 can be pushing it a little, but if they're the right people to be there at the time that the code is being made, the right people that are needed to make the great code, then we can have a few more. When we were working in these groups, what we found is that we started to also have a steward, and this steward's job was to sort of move the work through the process. Their job was to update Jira. Their job was to send emails, like, oh, we have to ask this person, we have to find out from the business if they want blue or green. All right, the steward's job, the steward is sitting to the side, and they're doing these sort of tangential tasks that aren't necessarily about writing code, but are important to getting the code written. And then the sheriff is the person that guards the flow of the work. And that was one of those roles that kind of came on us just out of nowhere. Someone that was sitting near the back of the group, and as people would come up and go, oh, I have to talk to Paige. I know he's typing right now, but this is really important. The sheriff's job was to say, all right, let me know, tell me what you need. And we're going to take a break in a few minutes, and I will, if it's really important, I'll let him know right now. If it's not, I'll let him know when we take a break, and he'll get back with you. Right. So they basically guarded the group to ensure that the flow would continue and be uninterrupted. So let me look at a few of the questions. Farhad, I'm going to skip to your second one about how do you effectively mob when it comes to troubleshooting and analysis type tasks, especially when one person has all the materials open, right? I think that it doesn't matter if you're typing code into the computer or you're working on analysis and troubleshooting type tasks. I think that we all have knowledge that we can contribute, and the group works together to solve that issue. And if it's analyzing, say maybe finding a bug, we don't have to sit around and watch one person try and do it. What can happen is that multiple people can give their input of, oh, let's go here. And meanwhile, somebody else is looking at it through the logs and searching for this error code. And then someone's checking the database back end and seeing what went into the database versus what was expected. All these sort of things can be very effective and are important, and can be done as a group. I see a couple of you join. Did we have other comments on that? Yeah, how do we decouple front end and back end development? Well, I don't know that you do. And not sure what the question exactly, what you mean by this. I like to work in good, strong vertical slices, right? So it's not front end, back end. Even though I use that example, right? But really, you want to work on one vertical slice, which means that the functionality you're writing will eventually get something maybe from the database and show it on the screen. You're not just writing the API, you're not just writing the front end code, you're not just writing the repository connection to the database or whatnot. I think this is where working collaboratively really shines, because you get everybody there that knows how to write the good code at the time the code is written. And that means not just developers, testers, PMs, business analysts, data people, ops people if you need them. So I think your question is more about how to effectively slice, and I think that's.
I have a comment there. I think that this question may have multiple interpretations. One may be when in a single team, someone has, let's say, back-end and front-end developers, and they are generally not used to working together. And if they do have any team sessions, they would be, let's say, split. That could be one interpretation. The other possible interpretation could be in case of microservices architecture, that we have one team for one microservice, another team for another microservice, third one for third microservice, and maybe another fourth team which is doing front end.
Yeah, and so that gets a little farther than just the practice of collaborative work, right? I think that comes into let's take the microservice example. I'm on a team and we focus on writing microservices, and we're writing one that is going to be consumed by another team that does the UI when I start to do this, again, we talked about all of the people that need to be there to make the great code are there at the time the great code is written, right? That means that someone from that UI team should be part of this mob or this group as we write the code. There's knowledge that they have that can make the code we write better and more effective. And so they need to be there. Now, this comes into a whole discussion about how we form teams, and that's almost another talk. I very much think that we shouldn't be forming teams around functionality. We should be forming teams around work. I've worked several places where one in particular, we had 50 people on the team, and that meant front end, back end, UI, test, BA, whatever. And the work that we had, we formed a team around that for as long as the work was in process, right? As opposed to saying this team's going to do all the UI work and this team's going to do all the microservices work. What we said is we need an API endpoint that's going to pass this data to be used on the front end. Who wants to work on that? Who can provide good input and good understanding and move this forward? And we let those people choose. There were some UI people. Hey, you know what? I've worked on the UI aspect of this, so I'm going to go work with this team because it's going to affect what happens on the front end, and I have some understanding of that. you know, the database people or people who are stronger in the database, one of them goes, yeah, that'll probably touch stuff that I've worked on before. I'm going to go work on that with that group as well, right? And so we're forming more around the work as opposed to separating out into feature or functionality teams and then trying to hand work to them and expect them to understand how the other teams are going to use it. So much bigger talk, much deeper into forming teams. But I think that's important if you're wondering how to work as a group and also work in a way that we're going to be able to create what's necessary for this other team. The answer is get somebody from the other team to come work with you. Oh, I'm not hearing you.
Oliver, I think maybe
I was wondering myself because my current team where I'm on is like 16 people. So I was wondering, whole team, you say like 4 to 6 people would be okay. How? I mean, I also already struggled with the idea. I wanted to somehow bring this whole team approach there. Because I think it would help, but then it's a huge team. But basically what you say makes totally sense. Well, we have to work and it is sliced vertically, and now let's form it's like a sub team around it, do the work, deliver, and then we continue maybe in a different sub team.
Yeah, and it means that the teams are not static, so that a team is not an organizational predetermined structure, but rather that you have, let's say, sets of work, and we could say that certain work to be done, and then people can join until reaching that limit, you know, between 4 and 6 people, and then it means that essentially no one will be working solo, and it also means that people can dynamically adjust. So it means that the team is actually a dynamic structure then, not a static one.
Yeah, and interestingly, you know, the 4 to 6 is just it's a number that seems to work for us. But there have been times when I've worked, you know, on this one company that we had 50 plus people on the team at the time that I moved on. But there were times when we had one group of people working, you know, collaboratively, and then we actually had 5, 6 mob stations. You know, we had a giant TV, a keyboard, and one computer, and a bunch of chairs, and that sort of thing. And a couple of them were close to each other. And there were times when we would be like, oh, you know what? I know they're working on this part, and we're going to start interacting with that part now. And we would like stop working and have a quick huddle with them, or we'd all go to their computer, or they'd all come and work on ours, you know, and the mob would get giant because those were the people that needed to be there at the time the software was being made. And we would work on how we're going to interface and how we're going to connect with this. And then we'd all like, okay, we all agree. And then we'd split back up and go back and keep working on the parts, you know, the other stuff. So it was, you know, the 4 to 6 is a baseline number, right? You don't have to necessarily be strict. And I think, you know, as a side note, oftentimes you look at a group that is working collaborative like this, and you think one person's typing and one person's talking and everybody else is just sitting around, right? Why do we have to have 5 developers working on one problem? And the answer to that is that they're often not 5 developers. There's 2 or 3 developers and a tester and a business analyst or whatever, right? But it's not 5 people, and there's not 3 people sitting around. The people that are there are writing the code, and maybe only one person's talking, but the business analyst or the database person is on their laptop, and they're like coming up with the SQL statement that's going to be needed here in a few minutes when we get to actually writing the SQL to pull out, and they're you know, they're doing work on their computer to get things ready to go into the code base. Or, you know, somebody else is like looking up this this functionality, this language functionality. You know, oh, I've heard about this new functionality that's come out in C#, and it's going to make the memory usage less. Like, I heard about that, but how do we implement that? So everybody else is still working on writing the code, and this person's like doing some quick research and like, oh, if we go here, we can do this. And, you know, so all these things that as a solo developer, I would do, but they would sort of cause me to switch context and take more time. Other people do it, or I do it, and other people are continuing to put code into the computer and move forward on solving the problem. So it, and this maybe kind of goes to the comment about educating the managers. And I think the education of the managers, like, we often joke that we had to train our PMs and managers when we were doing this. It's one of those things that I think is very apparent. The efficacy becomes very apparent when you do it and you start to do it well. But I don't know, it's really a hard thing to say, no, this will work, trust us, right? If your manager doesn't trust that you're doing the best thing, you know, how to make the company and the code better, right? The same thing with the PMs or the business side. When we start doing this, we often start, and I was going to get into talking about starting to work collaboratively later, but it takes practice. This is not something you go back to the office tomorrow or this afternoon or, you know, whatever, and just do, right? It takes practice, and that's important, because like riding a bike, like swimming, like you know, like playing football effectively, we don't just get out on the pitch and kick the ball and, you know, hooray, we're a football team, right? It doesn't work that way. We need to practice. We need to get better. We need to learn how to do this effectively. And we need to have someone in management that is sort of on board with this and will allow us to get better and understand that it will not happen overnight. And the same with the PMs. We had some PMs that we were obviously very sort of reticent to say we're okay with this. They want all the stuff done right now, right? I have all these functionality, stories, ideas, you know, if you could just put them into production tomorrow, then I might be happy. But what they really need to understand, and again, I'm kind of gonna, I don't want it to sound flippant here, but as a development team, it's our job to write the software. It's our job to understand and do what we know is best for writing that software. It's not the business side that's supposed to tell us how to work, right? In fact, I would argue that it's not even really the management that should be telling you how to work. It's the team should be deciding the best way to work. And it's really easy for me to say that, but it's not always easy to put that into practice. I think when you start to do this, you start to show those people external to just the group that is doing the software development, just the mob, the ensemble, whatnot. You start to show them the effectiveness, not just about producing. And that's really important. This is not really just about producing code. Because if we're just talking about producing code, for the most part, in the beginning, it's still faster to do it solo work, right? But what happens is that the code gets better. There are less bugs. There's a greater understanding of the domain between all of the members of the team. There is, there's refactoring. There's practices where we're like, man, we always have to walk down the hall to do this, or we always have to manually go here and do that. Let's just, we as a group, we just decide to write a quick script that takes care of it. Now everybody knows about that script. Now we're faster because we no longer have to take time to do the manual tasks. There's more of an understanding. This kind of goes back to the scatter gather that I was talking about earlier. There's more of an understanding of the work. I, as a person, get to learn more of the domain, the more people and the more tasks or stories that I work on. And because of that, I'm always learning. And because of that, we don't have to sort of queue up work for me, right? Again, if I'm a UI developer, strong in UI, on a normal team, I'm the UI person. I get all the UI work. That's 7 stories, Whereas there's a couple of back-end developers, they get 3 stories each. What happens when those 3 stories are done? What does that person do? They often have to wait for me, or I have to wait for them, right? And by combining our efforts, there's less waiting. There's more code being put into production, and not only that, if I have 7 things and they've worked on some UI stuff before, they could always say, that one looks pretty easy. That's just changing the text color. I remember doing that in this other group. So I'm gonna pick that up, work on that over here. So instead of having this huge queue, my queue is now smaller, and other people's queue, it evens it out. It evens the work out. So things continue to move forward, which in the end becomes faster, right? But it's a bit of a learning curve and a practice and an understanding curve that you have to overcome to see that. It's the long game instead of the short game. And if you play the long game, if your company understands the long game, then you're going to come out far ahead of where you would be if you continued to work on independent contributing, solo development, and just expecting people to work harder.
Exactly, and maybe to, I guess, summarize some of the points that you brought up is looking at things in the short term. It could be faster to do solo and parallelization. And that could also be the case for projects which are maybe in early stages or where things are not so complex. At some point, the project may also reach a high level of domain complexity, too much for one person to handle. And then what happens is, I think that's when solo work becomes very dangerous, when only one person owns a certain subset of the program. And that means both key man, like key person risk if they are not there, and it could lead to also all those waiting times because we are not able to equalize that. Like each module will have equal work. So all of this is, I guess, more systems level improvement.
Yes.
So I think that this was a really, really great comments and discussion. Now, just for the reminder, perhaps we might take a pause from the questions and continue with the practical, and then for the time remaining at the end to take the questions again.
Yes, I would like to point out one thing because I'll forget it if I don't. And working collaboratively is just as important in the beginning when there are simple steps. And the reason for that is because you build upon those simple steps, and you want the understanding of the team and the knowledge of the team to start out right. So, it's not just about waiting until your domain is complex. So nonetheless, let's move on and talk a little about how we do this. And communication, honestly, when it boils down to it, when you get right to the core of collaborative work, communication is what it's all about. Communication is what collaboration is, right? It's why it's so effective. So when I teach collaborative work, I like to talk about intent, location, details. This is a really important framework for talking about our code, and it will help us to make sure we continue to move forward. So when you first start, you say your intent. As the navigator, I say my intent. I want to call a function to calculate the value of two integers. That's my intent. And if someone at the keyboard, if the driver is very knowledgeable with the domain and kind of is of the same mindset, knows where we're going, that is all I have to say. They're going to write a function. They're going to take two variables as inputs or parameters. They're going to calculate the value, and they're going to return that. Right? Awesome. But sometimes you're talking, this is a simple example, but sometimes you talk about an example where maybe it's a little bit unknown to the driver. So you give a location, right? Can you add that on line 45? Or let's put that in the calculator class file, right? You give that location if they need it, right? If they're not sure, maybe you're writing a test and you're like, I want to write a function that calculates the value of two integers, and there's a pause, and your driver is kind of like, okay, well, we could put that in the calculator class, or we could just put that, here where we were working before, and like, you give that location if it's needed. And then finally, you give details if they're needed, because, well, the first two are helpful. If I say, I want to set up the code to pass the class into a handler we'll be writing next, maybe that's going to give your driver much more information so that they can put the code and sort of craft the code to what's going to be necessary coming up, right? Depending on your language or how your domain structure is set up, maybe it goes in the calculator class, maybe it's an extension on an integer. I don't know, but that's details that I would want to give to my driver as I'm solving the problem. These are communication details that maybe will help them to write the code later. Now, what this is not go down to line 4 and then write if, and then in the parentheses put foo equals true, and then return the string, with the quotes around it, yes. Right? I don't often have to say it that way. I shouldn't have to say it that way if I'm working with developers who understand how to write code, who understand the domain, right? That's when sort of this collaborative work, I think that's one of those reasons that people push back on it. They're like, I don't want to be told what to do. I know how to write code. Like, yeah, you do. So learning how to communicate that in an effective way without sort of telling them exactly what they should do. Right? I'm not sure that's the explanation that I would use, but like, that feeling of when someone tells you like, no, go to line 45 and write an if statement there and then put this in. Like, I know that. I know where we're going. Okay, so just tell me what you want. Which actually in my brain just sparked a little memory of, I often talk about, don't tell me what to do, tell me what you want, when I'm talking to the business side, when I'm talking about a chunk of work, right? If you have a story that says, add a variable to, you know, hold the information about the user. That's not a story. That's a terrible story. Don't tell me how to do it. Don't tell me what to do or where to do it. Tell me what you want. And I'm a software developer. I know how to write software. I'll write it where it goes best and where it's most effective, right? I just want to store the user for later. Same thing here when we're talking to our drivers in our collaborative group. Say your intent. I want to call a function to calculate the value of 2 integers, right? Give that location if it's needed. You can add it on line 45, or let's put it on the calculator class file, or let's open up the extensions class and put it on line 72 right below the last multiplication function that we wrote, right? Let's call it and then get details. Let's not just call it calculate. Let's call it add 2 integers, or let's call it add multiple integers. You know, you give that information without just to the level that your driver needs it. And that's a practice that's really important and is really, again, it's a practice. You have to learn how to do this, and you have to get comfortable doing this. But when we start to work this way, this is when our flow starts to pick up. Some online tools, and I talk about this because we're online today. I'm working mostly online with teams that companies that I'm consulting with right now. Most of the teams that I'm working with use Zoom. We use Zoom, and we have breakout rooms that we set up, and you know, the groups go to each breakout room, whatever it is that they're going to be working on in that breakout room, and they screen share. There's a great tool called MobSH, and MobSH is a command line tool that will create a session by creating a temporary Git branch locally and remotely. And then, so you'd like type a mob start, and you could give it a time if you want a timer, which is something else we could talk about. But like, it will create a branch for this work, both locally and remote. And then all the work will be done in there. And when you type mob, you know, mob done, I think. And it will sort of package all that stuff up and push it up to the temporary remote branch. Someone else types mob start on their computer, it will pull that temporary branch down, and you know, away you go. It's a really easy tool for creating handoffs of code that we're working on. At the end, we type mob end, and it smashes it all up and creates a commit that then you commit to main, because we don't work on branches normally, and then it will delete the temporary remote and local directories or branches. Sorry. So it's a really great tool. We don't necessarily use it as much as we used to, because we don't often branch. We usually commit directly to main. We have good, full, robust testing. And so, you know, what we tend to do is we tend to, somebody will share their screen with their IDE. We'll write a test. We'll, you know, make the test pass and do a little refactoring and commit and push, and then we'll hand off. And sometimes that's 3 lines of code. Sometimes that's 5, 8, you know, but it's very short and very, very quick. And because of that, we don't necessarily use the branching aspect. I've seen Code With Me, which is a JetBrains plugin, part of all of the JetBrains tools, and then Live Share with VS Code being used. Both of those are fine. Both of them have some caveats where, you know, obviously you're allowing someone else to use your computer, and sometimes, you know, like I'm not sure, I haven't used Code With Me in a while, but as I recall, it's one of those things where, like, if I move my mouse, you lose the ability to control the mouse. And so, there's some handoffs where I can't touch my mouse while you're writing, things like that. They work, and they can work fine. I've known teams, if you know Llewellyn Falco, he's a great coach. I know that he actually will set up a virtual desktop in like Azure or AWS, and everybody will connect to that, and they'll use that remotely. That's an option as well. But these are the main tools that I like to use when working online and remotely. And honestly, screen sharing in Zoom is probably, I found it to be the easiest. So let's talk a little about learning how to do this, because this is important. And I think this is a good thing that you could practice. You should practice, outside of necessarily production work. Take some time, take an hour a week, take an hour, a couple times a week, practice as a group. And the simplest way, the first thing you have to learn is to rotate. In this case, this slide is from doing it in person, but you could do this virtually as well. One person's the driver, one person's the navigator. Everybody else is just a participant. And you practice the handoff, you practice the turnover. And if you're in person, you physically get up and the driver moves to the end of the line, the navigator moves to the driver's seat at the keyboard, and everybody else moves up the line, right? But really importantly is to call out those roles. As the driver, I say, I'm Paige and I'm the driver. The next person will say, I'm Ava and I'm the navigator. The third person will say, I'm Chris and I'm next, meaning that they're going to move into the navigator spot at the next rotation. This is really important because it sets up this understanding of who's doing what roles. Later, we can have multiple navigators and a single driver, but in the beginning, we have one. And I kind of didn't talk necessarily about the rules around driver navigator. The driver's job is not to talk. Their driver's job is not to solve the problem. The driver's job is to be that smart input. I did mention that, but they can ask clarifying questions, but they shouldn't be talking about, oh, let's do this, let's go here, hey, whatnot. If the driver has an understanding of how to solve the problem, they switch out of that driver role. The navigator's job is to explain to the driver in the most effective way how to solve the problem. The navigator consults with everybody else in the group who is not the driver to come up with the most effective solution to the problem. Knowing that you'll find, I have a friend that I worked with who hated the driver role, right? As developers, we love solving the problem. That's really what we want to get to. We want to solve the problem. Nobody wants to type as much, right? We love solving the problem. So he would pass when it was his turn to move into the driver's seat most of the time, right? And that's okay. That's if the team agrees that's okay, that's okay. A lot of people don't, would rather not type, or they would, rather not be the navigator. Sometimes the driver role is a great role for a newer person to the group, or a newer person to the company or the team or to the software industry, because as the driver, I have to actively listen to what everybody's telling me and interpret that and put that into the computer, which allows me to learn, right? So again, I can ask clarifying questions. I don't understand why we're calling this, why we're using this syntax. I learned that syntax, and you have that conversation, but it's a great way to learn. That doesn't mean that they should always be the driver. It means that it's a really good position for someone who is looking to learn more about that domain or about the development or whatnot. So in the beginning, when we're learning this, we use a timer, and a strict timer and a short timer, which means 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a great start. Every 2 minutes, the timer goes off. No matter what you're doing, where you are, you stop and you rotate. No one but a single navigator talks, and that navigator can consult the rest of the group. This sort of enforces those roles again. It forces switching, and the quicker in the beginning, the better. Later, you start to get a longer time because you start to understand, and everybody understands how the roles work. Again, I talked about we chose as a group to switch roles every time our tests went green. We had multiple navigators, meaning that multiple people could talk, right? What happens when you have one person talking to the driver and the driver only listening to that one navigator is that you learn, and it's so hard for the other people in the group, you learn to allow other people to solve the problem as well. And again, as a senior developer, as a subject matter expert, like, oh, I know the answer. I want to tell them right now. Just listen to me. I'm going to, no, I have to learn that other people know how to write good code also. And so I have to learn to be quiet and only talk when I'm needed. This is why no one talks but the navigator in the beginning. As you get better at this, you open this up to multiple people being able to speak. And what we learn is that, okay, I don't have to say anything because I know where they're going to go, right? And if they don't go in that direction, then I'll suggest something or give my comment when we get to that point, right? But it's a practice. It's not an easy practice, but it's a practice. So, let's see. Oh, so one of the practices that I used, and where are we on time? I know that we've gone a little over an hour. I just want to make sure, because this is not necessarily something that we need to do.
You can continue, and we will then. I mean, we already had some comments, so you can continue a little bit for some more minutes.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, usually, again, I teach this as a workshop and it's collaborative, and it's a little harder to do. So, but I just want to kind of give you a representation of what I teach when we do this. And I like to use the numbers to words kata, if you're familiar with that. So I'm gonna you take an input of a number 0 to 9, and you return that word representing that number, like spelled out, not just a string like FizzBuzz, but the whole number. So when we do this, I'm going to switch over here to my WebStorm. There we go. And right now I have a test that's set up. It works, but what I actually want to do is I want this to be 0. So as the driver, I would actually open this up like we have it. This is how I like to lay out my IDE, with my tests on the left side and my production code classes on the right. And the reason I do it this way is because we tend to read left to right, and I think that the tests then become sort of a higher priority, a higher class citizen. And so as a group, we would sit around, we'd have one person at the keyboard, they're the driver, and the navigator would say, okay, we have a test here that that's passing in the number 0 to the parse function and expecting it to be an empty string. So let's actually return the right thing, which should be the word 0. Okay, then the driver would come over here and expect this to be 0. And I think I have that on. And I'd see my test fail, and then the driver would come over here. And again, without being necessarily told, they could fix this, right? We run our tests, they pass. At this point, the driver would say, okay, we have a passing test. Should I commit this? And the navigator might say, "What? Before we commit this, let's do a quick refactor. The name, the test works is a terrible name for this. It doesn't really tell what the intent of the test is. So let's change that to number 0 returns the word 0." Right? So okay. So the driver's 0. 0. Right? Okay, that's great. Okay, is that the only refactor? Again, the navigator is thinking about solving the problem. How do I make the code better? Parse is an okay name. We need something more than just parse, because it doesn't really tell us. It tells us sort of what it does, but it doesn't really tell us what it does. How about we go and rename that to, I don't know, return word for number. All right. So then the driver comes over here, knows the hotkeys. They're typing the hotkeys, and right. Right, and the driver's running the tests every time. If they're not automatically running, they're passing. Do we have anything else to change? The navigator says, no, that works for now. Okay, so we commit that, right? And again, as the driver, I'm not just going to come here and type, added, whatever. I'm not going to just start typing, because if I start typing about what this commit message is going to be, this is me thinking about solving the problem. This is me not in the driver role. Again, my role is input. So I might say to the navigator, okay, what's the commit message you want for this? I might know as the driver, right? I'm a developer. I know which it's close, but this isn't my role in this group. My role is to be the input. Navigator says, we return the word 0 when we pass in 0. Let's see. Return the word. Zero. I gotta spell that right. So at this point, the navigator says, no, not past tense, please. When I write a commit message, this is something I would say as a navigator. When I write a commit message, what I'd like to do is think about the sentence, if I apply this commit, it will, and then finish that sentence with the actual commit message. So instead of it will return the word 0, just make it a present tense. It will return the word 0 when passing. And the driver says, yeah, okay, great, commit it. Right. So this is the interaction. And now at this point, the driver, would take his hands off the keyboard if we're working remotely, and stop sharing. Someone else would start sharing, and if we're using like mob sh, they would mob start and pull down that new temporary branch, or they would share and pull down if we committed it and pushed it. Someone else would become the driver. Someone else would become the navigator, or as we get working farther into our practice, everyone else would start being the navigator as well. So that is, let's go back to. Right, so we'd finish 0 through 9, and then Oh, I skipped that. Then we would actually have a quick retro at the end, right? See, if this was the story that we were working on for the day or for the session, all right, how'd that go? Right? Do you think we came up with the best solution? Are there things that came out of that we could do better next time, et cetera, et cetera? Okay. Then we move on to the next, right? And in this case, I'll give you an example. In this one, it would be, okay, let's do multiples of 10, right? And then you get into even more multiples of 100, 21. You want the word 20 and you want the word 1 and parsing all that. It's a great practice for this. And it's doing these simple katas is with the idea of learning communication, learning to work collaboratively. This is the way you sort of get into it. It will be much more effective working this way and learning this way than it will just to get together a group, right? Oh, I do have a retro in there. Yep. Oh, there we have 3 numbers. And so that's what I have. And I'm willing to have a discussion, take some questions. This slide deck I'll be happy to share, and you can use the QR code. It goes to a GitHub repository that has links and the slide deck in it as well, and other things. So it's all available for you if you guys want to check it out.
Thank you, Paige. So let's see. We also have some questions, still some questions. So Bob wrote, putting in my question for later. So now we're at later. How do you avoid silent onlookers in mobbing? Is there a way that doesn't rely on one person in charge coordinating, swapping positions? I think you have talked about it, but you can.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming we're talking about say a group of 4 or 5 people, and you have the one person who's not talking the entire time, or doesn't. Is that?
I think this is the case where there's one person in charge, and the rest are silent onlookers. I've even experienced that as a situation.
Yeah. So in the beginning, you do the rotation, you practice the rotation I was talking about. You have one navigator and one driver, and you ask everybody to rotate through that. And the driver's role, again, is not to solve the problem and not to ask, or not to talk, but to ask sort of clarifying questions. The other people who are not the navigator, as we're practicing, they don't get to tell the driver what to do. They only get to talk when the current navigator is asked them for help. And so that one person, usually usually the stronger person, the senior person, the person that's done this for a long time, has a lot of domain knowledge, is really excited about getting this done. It's not about getting this done. It's about learning to communicate and collaborate. And they have to, going through this practice will sort of force them to learn to not talk. I think that's the best. I think, you have to get to that point where that person learns they don't have to talk all the time. They can give their information and their knowledge when it's needed. And that's not an easy thing to do. The same with the silent person, right? By rotating into that navigator position, you're asking them to be the one that's talking, right? And that can be actually uncomfortable for people. And I'm definitely not that way. So it's a little harder for me to sort of give advice on how to get someone who's maybe introverted or shy or less communicative, less excited about talking than I am. right? It's harder to give that like, here's how you do it, because I don't come from that place. But I think that as you practice this, it's really about becoming a team and learning to work together. And there are things where you can say, if you find that one person's not being part of that conversation, you can say, I haven't heard from Paige in a while. Do you have any input? I'd love to, if you think we're going down the right way or whatnot. Right. But I think the more we
probably also into this question or into this statement, Raoul would love to know how to build the psychological safety in the initial days of the collaborative model.
Yeah.
Till you get to the point where you enjoy laughing at yourself freely.
So part of this is building that psychological safety. I think you need to not work on production code when you're first practicing this, right? Because you need to be able to make mistakes as a developer, make mistakes as a group of people, right? And be okay with those mistakes that others are making as well. And in fact, if you can get out of viewing them as mistakes and view them as learning opportunities, it's going to be much easier. And the problem with doing that when you're working in production code is that it's often very hard, even if we're like, okay, we'll create a branch and we'll practice this and then we'll throw the branch away at the end and it's okay if we screw it up. There's still something in here that goes, no, if this works, we're going to check it in, right? You still can't sort of disconnect the practice from the production. So when you're first learning this, set aside time as a group to practice, use a kata of some sort, and really focus on the communication. Really focus on, not producing production quality code, but instead being all right to make mistakes. Yeah, and I think slowly, the more we work together, the more we learn to work as a team, and the more that psychological safety aspect comes into it. I think there's a lot of that that goes into that, but I think team chartering, team agreements, those are really important for this as well. Where you call out, here's what we are going to do, here's what we want to do, and here's what we agree to do. And you hold everybody accountable to that, not just developers, PMs, Scrum Masters, testers, whatever roles you have on your team, they're all part of those agreements, and you hold them accountable to that. That's really important as well.
Exactly, because also this question with the more dominant and less dominant personalities, I mean, I experienced that too in the team. So I assume, just from what you're saying, is basically when with this practice, you will also even that out because of this rotation, because everybody needs to talk and everybody also needs to be quiet for once. Everybody probably learns a little bit to either talk more or talk less. Or what's your experience?
Yeah. And it's not, yes, I think you're correct. I think you do learn that. I like to talk. And so I often find myself sort of talking maybe when I shouldn't. Sometimes at the retro afterwards, I'm like, man, I navigated a lot. I talked a lot during that last session or during, today. Maybe I should not talk as much. Or, someone will say, you kept stepping on that other person when they were trying to come up with an idea, and like, oh, if you say that, in that retro with this idea of like, we all want to get better. And this comes back to the sort of team agreements and psychological safety aspect. We all want to get better. I accept that as something I can work on to help myself and the team get better, as opposed to like, yeah, you can't tell me what to do, you know? So there's a bunch of aspects that come into working together, working collaboratively. And it's not just, you know, I talk very much about the process and the fundamentals aspect. There's a lot of other things that come with that, but there's a lot of things that grow out of that, right? It's sort of that reinforcing practice of the more we do this, the more we work together, the more we spend time together and as a team, the stronger we become as a team and the more safe we become as a team, you know, and that sort of thing. So it reinforces itself. But you gotta practice, and it's not easy in the beginning.
And my problem is also it's all distributed. So you have to do it distributed, but I think this sounds like something that I can actually help exactly with the communication part, because it's distributed, it's much harder to communicate.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. So like I've worked on a team, this team that I was just working with lately. We had, I'm in Seattle, Washington. We've had people on the East Coast of the United States. We have some people in, one person in Sweden, one person, you know, or a couple people in India. And you have to, part of our team agreement is that we're all going to be online at certain times. You know, for those of us in the United States, we're all going to be online and working together from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., you know, Central Time or Eastern Time, or, you know, and so that's not 8 hours, that's not a full day, but that's enough time that we overlap, and that you know, we can assume that we're going to be in there at a time when we can work together as a group. That's not to say that we have to be online and work in a, you know, in a group all the time. The really nice thing about this, about working collaboratively in this way, is that at the end of the day in the United States, people start to drop off, and the Sweden and India people come on, and I can keep working for another hour and collaboratively working in a group with them. They just continue to move forward with what we were doing. They don't have to sort of pick up and go like, oh, where were they? And what did they commit last time? And we go back through the commit log and whatnot. Doesn't matter, because I'm part of the group, and we just keep, you know, the communication aspect is there. We keep writing code. So, you know, but there is definitely some agreements that have to be around when you're going to do this, and when you're going to make yourself available, and what that looks like, especially when we're remote and distributed.
You cannot imagine how hard it is to get this agreement. I have another question. How do you effectively mob when it comes to troubleshooting and analysis type tasks, especially when one person has all the materials open?
Yeah, and I think I kind of touched on this before. Mobbing, again, is just about having the right people there to solve the problem at the, you know, and work together. So it doesn't matter whether you're writing code, or you're thinking about architecture, or you're deciding, you know, on what new technology you're going to use, or what new library you're going to use, or you're trying to find the bug in the system. You work together with the knowledge you have. And if there's one person who has a lot of knowledge in it, then that's fine. But my answer would be, don't let them sit at the keyboard, right? There's a really great quote, and it's from Llewellyn Falco, and I'm probably gonna paraphrase because I can't quote it exactly, but basically, for code to go, you know, for code to go to production, it has to go through someone else's body, right? When we're working collaboratively. So if I'm the one with the knowledge and the resources and I understand it all and I've got all the stuff open on my machine, great. I'm the one that's going to solve the problem, but I'm not the one that's going to be typing, right? And that's okay. Other people should be there as well. One person's typing, they're thinking about syntax and where to go and what logs to open up, where do I find the files, do I open them up in Notepad or in whatnot. They're thinking about the logistical aspects, and the other person's thinking about how do we analyze this, or how do we troubleshoot this, where do we go, what process do we use, and they're talking about this, they're communicating this to the others in the group. Other people in the group may or may not have a full understanding of what's going on, but they're learning. And so if that person, we always talk about it as a bus number or a lottery number, in the idea of what is the least number of people in your organization that if each of those people won the lottery and left work tomorrow, what is that number where you could keep working? So if there's one person with all the knowledge and they win the lottery and they leave the company tomorrow, our company is dead in the water. That's a lottery number of 1. That's terrible. If you have 50 people in your company, you want a lottery number of 50, right? You want more people to understand, more people to learn, so that more people can do the work when you get into a situation where the one person or the 2 people who know a lot about it aren't always available. So that's where, again, collaborative working. This person may have a lot of knowledge and they may know how to do all the stuff. That's great. Let's get a bunch of people in here with them. One person can do the typing. The other people can learn and give their input.
Definitely, and I just want to add to that one regarding the key person risk. I would also find that to be a strong argument for companies to even beat that efficiency argument.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing about efficiency, like that something take half an hour or 5 minutes, is sort of a short-term thing. But then when you tell them, okay, we could save 1 hour or 5 hours or 10 hours, but imagine then going bankrupt.
Yeah.
Because no one can maintain the critical part of the system and react fast enough. And then when it's put into that perspective, like the potential huge loss that the company can encounter, then it may serve to shift people's minds. And the other part that I really found useful was how you emphasize the importance of keeping to roles. So, for example, that strict rule, which I also like enforcing, which is only the navigator talks and everyone else listens and the driver types away, that really helps to balance out different people irrespective of their personalities, which may include repeating that rule multiple times until people get adjusted to it. But it really helps people, I would say, to be more conscious about themselves, and it helps, for example, people who are more dominant to realize that, look, this other person was able to do it, like when I'm quiet, they were actually able to do it. It didn't need me to solve. In other words, I was not crucial for the solving of this problem. And the people who were quieter or who were afraid of speaking or maybe feeling embarrassed and maybe never spoke up in front of a group and always worked alone, maybe when they speak a few times and they see that they are moving towards a solution and they see that nothing catastrophic happened and that they didn't suffer embarrassment, then they may also become more comfortable with speaking as well. So that's why I've personally found that strict enforcement to the rules was able to overcome even those personality challenges.
Yeah. Quick little example. one of the things that we often ran into was a senior or more knowledgeable person. Like, we would get to this part of how are we going to decide whether we do it this way or that way, right? And what we decided as a group, as a team, is that let's implement the path of the person who is newest to the team. Maybe they're the youngest, maybe they're just out of college, maybe they're newest to the company, but let's, and in fact, actually, oftentimes when we would run into this, like, let's do it this way, no, let's do it that way problem, we would be like, okay, we'll do it both ways. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to implement it, in a branch, we're going to implement it the way of the newest person to the team. So we'd write the code and we'd either, one, find out that it didn't work right away, like, oh, that's not going to work, or it would work. And then we turn to the other person who, was maybe the senior person or a little more knowledge, and we'd say, like, okay, should we implement it your way? And usually the answer was, no, okay, this works. Right? Sometimes that newer person, especially we had interns, and sometimes that newer person had an understanding of how code and framework and language has evolved that I'm like, I've never seen that function before. That's awesome. Let's use that from now on, right? But if, as the senior person, if we'd done it my way every time, we never would have learned of that other way. I never would have learned of that other way because, because I'm making the decision. So, but that was an agreement we had as a team, really great one. But you have to have those sort of, how do we solve a conflict type agreements.
Great. So, Valentina, do you have anything to add?
I think that it was a very useful presentation. And thanks also for sharing your resources. So there will also be links to any relevant material to the audience. This is really insightful, and I like also the whole explanation regarding terminology and naming and mob programming and whole team approach. In fact, this is what I see perhaps the only approach that could be called as a teamwork approach, because it creates synergy between people across the whole team and actually leads to the optimal solution and to increasing everyone's capability and reducing whole person risk. So all of those benefits all in one. So thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you a lot also for me. I mean, I got like a recipe how to implement it and get started, and I really like that, and I will put that to use soon. So very happy that you that you had this detailed list.
Fabulous. I really do like talking about it. I do teach this, and I'm willing to talk with anybody about, questions. Just contact me either online. Well, I have to be online, right? Because I'm not in your area right now. I'd love to get over there more often and do this in person. But yeah, I'm more than willing to talk about questions or how do we actually move forward with implementing this at a company, or how do you get better at it? And I've enjoyed.
I will certainly use that.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot. So, and if you want to keep learning how to deliver quality software faster, well, keep following us on the social media. And thanks a lot again, Paige. And see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.